The court didn't just go quiet, it went cold. The kind of silence that sucks the oxygen out of your lungs. The kind that makes even the judge blink like they've just realized they're standing too close to a live wire. Because when Tom Bower finally said those two words, Operation Cuckoo, the entire room reacted like someone had dropped a match into a room full of gas, and right there, under the brutal white courtroom lights, the Duchess's smile didn't fade. It fractured, and the prince, looked like a man who just watched his whole life get ripped off the wall and burned in front of him. And listen, before anyone starts clutching pearls, this is a fictional royal drama set in a made-up monarchy where secrets move like shadows and titles are just weapons wrapped in velvet, but the emotions, the betrayal, the jaw-dropping courtroom cruelty, that part feels painfully real, because power always looks the same when it panics. So let's talk about that day in London, January 2026, the day the Supreme Court of the Kingdom of Albion became a stage, and every single person inside it was forced to watch a fairy tale bleed out in public. They called it a civil matter. That's what they always call it when the rich and the royal are trying to keep the public calm. Civil, private, procedural. Please, this wasn't civil. This was a controlled detonation. Outside, crowds poured in like a tidal wave, pressed against barriers, phones up, eyes hungry, because the rumor had already spread through the city like smoke. Tom Bower was testifying, and he wasn't there to share opinions, he was there to end someone. Bower walked in with that terrifying calm that only comes from a man who doesn't need to bluff. Silver hair, razor stare, papers in his hand like they weighed nothing at all, and yet everyone could feel it. Those pages were heavier than any crown. In Albion, there's an unspoken rule: you don't drag the bloodline into court. You don't say certain names out loud. You don't hint at the hidden files. You don't poke the skeletons, because the skeletons don't just rattle, they claw back. But Bower didn't care about rules. He cared about leverage. And there they were, sitting side by side, Prince Harry, the spare-turned rebel, dressed in a dark suit like grief had tailored it personally, and Duchess Maribel, perfect posture, perfect hair, perfect public face. Except if you watched her hands, you'd see the truth leaking through the cracks. She held her clutch so hard her knuckles screamed white. She didn't look afraid the way normal people look afraid. She looked afraid the way chess players look afraid when they realize the board is rigged and the opponent has been playing a different game the whole time. Prince Harry kept staring forward, but it wasn't focus, it was numbness. It was that hollow stare of someone trying to force the universe to rewind. And then Bower opened his mouth, and the courtroom found out the universe doesn't rewind, it only exposes. He didn't start with petty scandal. No petty drama, no who said what nonsense. He went straight for the thing monarchies protect more fiercely than money: legitimacy, blood, succession, the sacred myth. He said the timeline doesn't match, and the air shifted. He said the documents were revised, and the legal team on the Duchess's side stiffened like they'd been slapped. He said there was a file, and the judge leaned forward, and then, like a blade sliding in silk, he dropped it. Operation Cuckoo. You could literally hear the press pen stop scratching. Operation Cuckoo, according to palace whispers that have floated for years but never landed anywhere official, was the nickname for a private internal inquiry. Quiet, discreet, sealed behind layers of protocol, used when the House of Albion suspected something delicate had slipped into the nest. Not because they wanted drama, because they feared collapse. Because if the nest is compromised, everything falls. The institution, the state, the entire illusion that keeps the public bowing. And Bower claimed under oath that Operation Cuckoo existed for one reason only: to determine whether the heir presented to the public belonged to the bloodline or belonged to the story. Now watch what happens to a room when you suggest the heir might be a narrative instead of a fact. The Duchess's lips parted like she was about to laugh, yes laugh, that polished how ridiculous expression that celebrities and royals love to wear when they think they can charm their way out of fire, but the laugh never arrived. Because Bower didn't give her time to perform. He pushed forward like a freight train. He started laying out the record of overlaps. That's what he called it. A series of dates, trips, missing hours, unexplained movements, everything neatly arranged like a noose made of calendars. He pointed back to 2013, years before the prince, when Maribel finalized her divorce from a film producer named Trevian Inglis, a man the palace press office always dismissed as ancient history, because that's what they do: erase the past so the present looks clean enough to worship. But Bower didn't erase, he highlighted. He claimed the connection never truly died, never properly severed, just went quiet, like a phone left face down on a table. And then he pivoted to 2016 when Maribel met Prince Harry, the kind of meeting that gets packaged for audiences roses, candlelight, fate, destiny, the universe writing romance with glitter ink, except Bauer's version didn't glitter. It stank of logistics. He alleged unexplained gaps in Maribel's schedule while she worked abroad, gaps that aligned with travel activity connected to Trevian. Not proof, he implied pattern. Not scandal, he implied strategy. And here's where it got truly vicious, because Bauer didn't just aim at Maribel, he aimed at Harold's heart. He looked directly at the prince and said, in that voice that doesn't rise because it doesn't need to, the pressure to accelerate was not love. It was timing. Timing. That word hit the prince like a punch to the ribs, because timing is what you worry about when you're hiding something. Timing is what you worship when you're trying to lock down a story before anyone can check the facts. Bauer asked why the engagement moved so quickly, why the palace medical protocols were reportedly resisted, why certain traditional confirmations were suddenly modernized and unnecessary, why the paperwork around the birth became a fog so thick you could barely see your own hand inside it. In Albion, tradition is not a preference, it's a security system. And when someone bypasses the security system, people start asking what they were trying to sneak through the door. The Duchess's face did something strange then. This tiny flicker, so fast most people missed it, like the mask had slipped a millimeter and you could see the panic underneath, because she didn't respond with fury. Not yet, not the way you'd expect from a woman who normally fights every whisper like, it's war. Instead, she blinked hard, and the prince's expression, oh God. The prince looked like someone had finally read aloud a sentence he'd been terrified to read himself, because in that moment, you could almost see the memories reassembling in his head, the rushed decisions, the locked rooms, the trust me, the don't ask, the endless insistence that curiosity equals betrayal, the way the palace staff went stiff whenever certain topics drifted too close, like servants trained to shut doors before anyone hears what's inside. Bauer then introduced the second blow, the one that made the Duchess's breathing change. He referenced genetic comparison results, not saying the words everyone was thinking, not spelling it out like a tabloid. He kept it clinical, controlled, deadly. And that's when the courtroom finally cracked. A murmur rose, a ripple of disbelief. The kind of reaction that happens when a room realizes it's not hearing gossip, it's hearing something structured, prepared, weaponized. The Duchess's legal team moved like they wanted to interrupt, but the judge didn't stop it. The judge let it hang there, because you don't interrupt a grenade mid-air, you watch where it lands. And then Maribel stood up, not calmly, not elegantly, not with the composure she'd built her entire public empire on. She stood like her chair had become lava. Her eyes shone with tears she couldn't fully control. The kind of tears that don't look rehearsed, they look betrayed, cornered, furious at the universe for daring to catch up with her. She grabbed her clutch, turned, and walked out fast. Too fast. Heels biting the floor like punctuation marks. The door slammed behind her, and it sounded like the end of an era. Prince Harry didn't follow immediately. He sat there frozen, hands gripping his knees, jaw clenched so tight you could practically hear enamel grinding, and for the first time, he didn't look like a prince. He looked like a man realizing he might have sacrificed everything, his family, his homeland, his reputation, for a story he never got to fact check. And Bauer didn't pause to savor it. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply continued, because the scariest people don't celebrate while they destroy you, they stay focused. He described the palace's alleged dilemma in 2019, how the monarchy was already limping through scandal after scandal, how the institution couldn't afford another crack in the fade, how the public's faith is a fragile thing that shatters once and never fully repairs. He suggested the palace chose silence not out of kindness, but out of survival. And that's the part that should chill you the most, because if the palace knew and the palace stayed quiet, then silence wasn't neutrality. Silence was participation. Silence was complicity. Silence was a crown choosing the institution over the truth. And here's the sick twist. Bauer implied that the Duchess may have understood the palace's weakness perfectly, may have realized they would rather swallow poison than admit the nest had been touched. And if she understood that, then she didn't just marry into power, she learned how to hold it hostage. Prince Harry finally lifted his eyes then, and it wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't even sadness. It was devastation. The kind that makes you feel seasick. Because the worst betrayals aren't the ones where someone leaves you. The worst betrayals are the ones where you realize you were never even holding the real version of your own life. And as the court recessed, the press surged out into the winter air, screaming questions into microphones. The crowd outside roaring like a stadium. While inside the palace, somewhere behind stone walls and locked safes, people who have guarded secrets for generations suddenly had to face one brutal truth. In 2026, secrets don't stay buried. They leak, they explode, they ruin. And this was only the opening strike. The hallway outside courtroom 7 looked like the aftermath of an emotional car crash. Aides whispering into phones, legal teams huddled like they were planning a battlefield retreat, reporters nearly vibrating out of their skin, but inside Prince Harry's head, the noise had already drained away, replaced by something far more dangerous, silence loud enough to hear memories rearranging themselves. Because once doubt enters, it doesn't knock politely. It kicks doors open. He replayed everything. The urgency, the closed-door conversations, the moments he was told, "Trust me, this is for our protection," and suddenly those words didn't sound romantic or protective anymore. They sounded strategic, and strategy has no heartbeat. Duchess Maribel didn't return for the afternoon session. Officially, she was indisposed. Unofficially, half the court staff swore they heard shouting from a private consultation room. Not weeping, not despair, but fury. The kind of fury that comes from someone who has spent years controlling the narrative and just realized the script is on fire. Tom Bower resumed the stand with the same icy composure, like the morning hadn't detonated a royal earthquake. He spoke about patterns of influence, about image construction, about how modern monarchy doesn't collapse from war anymore, it collapses from contradiction. Then he said something that turned unease into dread. There was a retrieval attempt. The judge asked him to clarify. Bower claimed that shortly after the internal inquiry, Operation Cuckoo, was quietly sealed, a request had been made through unofficial channels to access medical authentication materials connected to the royal child. Not by the palace, not by the court, by someone representing Maribel's private interests. The implication slithered across the courtroom floor like smoke. If you try to retrieve something, you already know it exists. Prince Harry's jaw tightened so hard a muscle flickered in his cheek. He didn't look at the gallery. He didn't look at the empty seat where his wife should have been. He just stared at the polished wood of the bench in front of him like it might crack open and swallow him whole. Bower explained that the palace had refused the request, not aggressively, not publicly, quietly, formally. The kind of refusal designed to avoid a paper trail that could later explode. And that refusal, he suggested, was the moment the marriage stopped being a love story and became a standoff. Because from that point forward, the Duke and Duchess's public narrative shifted. More interviews, more accusations, more distance from the institution, more urgency to relocate overseas, where jurisdiction changed and certain disclosures became infinitely harder to force. Exile, Bower said, is often sold as freedom, but sometimes it's just relocation beyond reach. That line hit like a stone dropped into still water. The courtroom artist later said Prince Harry looked like someone watching a ghost describe his life more accurately than he could. Then came the part that made even seasoned legal observers shift in their seats. Bower stated that two former palace staff members, both long retired, both bound by lifelong confidentiality agreements, had provided sworn statements that unusual security classifications had been applied to one specific file in the Royal Archives in mid-2019, a classification level typically reserved for matters of state security, not gossip, not scandal, security. Why would the biological legitimacy of a royal heir be treated like a national threat? Because, Bower argued, in a hereditary monarchy, bloodline is state security. And if that bloodline becomes uncertain, the entire constitutional structure wobbles like a table with a missing leg. He didn't say the child wasn't Harrow's. He said the palace acted like they weren't sure. That distinction, subtle, technical, devastating, hung in the air long after he stopped speaking. Outside the courtroom, the public reaction was already spiraling. News alerts lit up phones across Albion. Commentators shouted over each other. Social media fractured into camps. Those who believed the institution was being blackmailed, those who believed Maribel was being destroyed by a smear campaign, and those who believed the prince himself was the true casualty. A man raised inside a system built on duty, now realizing duty might have been used against him. Inside, the judge called a recess. Prince Harry finally stood. For a moment, he looked like he might collapse under the weight of invisible things. Then he straightened, not with confidence, but with that rigid posture people adopt when they're trying not to fall apart in front of strangers. A court aide approached him, whispering something urgent. He nodded once and walked, not toward the exit where the press waited, but toward the private consultation corridor where Maribel had vanished earlier. No cameras were allowed back there, no microphones, just stone walls that had heard royal secrets for centuries and never repeated a word. Witnesses say the argument lasted less than 10 minutes. When they emerged separately, everything had changed. Maribel's eyes were dry now. No tears, no tremble, just a calm so sharp it felt rehearsed. She walked past the press without speaking, face blank, like someone who had made a decision that didn't require public approval. Prince Harry followed minutes later. He stopped, looked directly at the cameras for the first time that day. And in that split second, the world saw something raw and unguarded. Not rage, not denial, but betrayal so deep it looked physical. He didn't answer questions. He didn't defend anyone. He just said 4 words that detonated louder than anything Bauer had testified. I need the truth. Not we deny this. Not this is false. Not we will fight. I need the truth. In a monarchy built on certainty, that sentence was a revolution. Because the moment a prince publicly admits uncertainty about his own story, the fairy tale is already over. By nightfall, palace officials were locked in emergency meetings. Legal scholars debated succession protocols on live television. Opposition politicians called for parliamentary oversight. The phrase constitutional review began trending, a phrase that in Albion is political code for the ground is shaking. And somewhere deep beneath the palace, in a climate-controlled archive where history sleeps in locked drawers, a file labeled with a bird's name sat waiting. Operation Cuckoo. If opened, it could end speculation or end a dynasty. But files don't open themselves. People do. And the question echoing through Albion that night wasn't whether the truth existed. It was who would dare to release it and who would be destroyed when they did. Destroyed when they did. Destroyed when they did. Destroyed when they did.